Well, the Crown Pastoral Land Reform Bill takes into account 160 properties covering 1.2 million hectares between Marlborough and Southland. In the House, the debate is going on between both sides, where we heard earlier from ACT Rural spokesperson Mark Cameron, who believes that the Commissioner of Land has excessive control over how leaseholders can use their land for lawful purposes, whereas Land Information Minister Damien O'Connor states that he has been working in close contact with the High Country Accord and will only make changes where necessary. Well, joining our panel on the Opinion Maker this week is two women who are farming the high country that make up two properties within that 160 properties affected under the changes to the Crown Land Act of 1948. Welcome to the program, Emily Murray from Glenmore Station in the Mackenzie Basin and Kate Cox from Mount Nicholas Station near Queenstown in the Wakatipu Basin. Thank you so much, ladies, for joining us. I think the best thing to do is we start by setting the scene about your own operation, just so we understand the scale between freehold, leasehold, and your involvement within the community over generations. Kate, I'll start with you.
Oh, hi, Sarah. Thanks so much for having me on this morning. So my family farms at Mount Nicholas Station, which is on the western shores of Lake Wakatipu. The station is just over 36,000 hectares in size, and basically all of it is pastoral lease. I think there's about 80 hectares of freehold, but it's for all intents and purposes completely pastoral lease. My family's farmed here for the last 45 years, and we farm merino sheep and Hereford cattle. I'm also a trustee for the High Country Accord Trust, which was established in 2003 to promote and protect the rights of holders of pastoral leases.
And Emily, to you.
Well, thank you, Sarah, also for having me on this morning. We farm Glenmore Station. We're on the western shores of Lake Tekapo. So we run from the shores of the lake right up to the Mount Cook National Park. We've got just over 19,000 hectares. And the Murray family, my husband Will, he is fourth generation on the property. So the Murray family have farmed Glenmore for over 100 years. And we run merino sheep, including a stud, and also Angus cattle and deer.
Kate, can you set the scene for us around your experiences right back to the initial days of Helen Clark's involvement in the High Country and this particular act that was established back in 1948 and the tenure review process through your eyes, but also to your involvement with the High Country Accord?
Yeah, sure, Sarah, and I'll try and sort of keep it brief, and then you can ask me more questions if you want to, because there's a lot to cover in there. But basically, if I go back to the Land Act when it was first established, the simple purpose to establish it was actually the lands were seen as being very marginal and difficult lands, and to a large extent they still are pretty difficult to manage. And so the Land Act was put in place to give leaseholders longevity, to encourage good practices and let them make longer term decisions. Prior to the Land Act, there wasn't a long term form of tenure in place. So the Land Act was put in place with that in mind, that it would give long-term security to leaseholders so they could do a really good job of looking after the high country and tackle longer-term problems, particularly around weed and pest, which to a huge extent in the high country has happened, particularly around control of rabbits, was a major issue back in those days. That needed tackled. So I guess that's the basis of why the Land Act was formed. Then would you like me to carry on a little bit from there?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, sure. So then basically it worked really well, but I think when the CPLA came in, it was really around some of the properties that initially had been created as pastoral leases. A lot of them, it was deemed that it would be suitable or desirable to have portions of those properties return to full Crown ownership, so cease being alienated Crown land and become conservation land, and other portions of those properties were suitable to be freeholded. And so hence we got into the 10-year review. And I think, at the time, the government's view was that perhaps all of those properties that were Crown pastoral leases would travel through and go through that 10-year review process. Hindsight's always a great thing, and there was certain properties of which we've still got 160 of them. Some of those are in the process of 10-year review, but the majority are not. That for one reason or another chose to stay as pastoral leases and not entered the process and exited the process again, or just weren't suitable to go through a 10-year review. So we've sort of come to the point now where the Crown's accepted that maybe some of these properties won't go through a 10-year review ever, or that's their position. They would like to cease 10-year review. And really it's about moving forward from here.
Mm. And Emily, what has been your family's experience with the 10-year review process?
Well, Sarah, we entered into 10-year review. It's a voluntary process. We entered in just under 20 years ago with the full intention to try and make a 10-year review work for Glenmore, acknowledging that we do have a great deal of significant inherent values on the property, and we wanted to ensure that they are looked after for the future, generations to come. And unfortunately, we've just found the system to be incredibly frustrating. We certainly haven't made the inroads that we were hoping to make. We've been highly motivated through the whole process, but we were identified in February of 2019 as a priority property. The Minister of the day identified Glenmore. This is when the Reform Bill was in its early establishment phases. And so we were contacted by LINZ on behalf of the Crown to really try and push our 10-year review through as quickly as possible. And nothing has happened since. So we are still even after 20 years of negotiations, we're still at a very early stage of the process.
Wow, 20 years.
Yes.
Kate, what is the general feeling amongst those that you represent with the Accord of what an ideal future could look like moving forward, and some of making up some of the content of some of these submissions?
I think, Sarah, I think that the Accord, and I think most high country farmers have been quite dismayed by the legislation that we've ended up in front of us now. The relationship that we've had in the past with LINZ, although LINZ has been limited at times because of some of their resourcing and perhaps some of their capability, it's always been a contractual relationship, built on communication and trying to achieve common goals. And really what this legislation is doing, it's picking that up and trying to put a strong regulatory framework around the pastoral lease system, and at the same time removing the option for 10-year review. And if I can just touch on the 10-year review, and you've just heard from Emily about their family's experience with that. And for a lot of families, for families and for the professionals that work with them, and for LINZ too, a huge amount of time and money has actually been invested in a lot of these properties to get them to the point where they are now in their 10-year review. And so it's a real waste of resource and time to actually completely cease that, other than a handful of properties that are almost across the line. And I think whilst 10-year review has had some obvious deficiencies in the past, it remains a really good tool for being able to actually, move forward and establish conservation areas for the public, and move parts of properties which are perhaps more suited to freehold ownership into that type of ownership. And so it's a shame to give up on it completely without perhaps just reviewing it and trying to address some of the shortcomings that have been identified in the past.
Emily, how does a leasehold contractual agreement with the Crown look like in your eyes going forward if 10-year review was to cease?
Oh, Sarah, we have grave concerns, particularly this reform bill is adopted, and we have new legislation around our contractual obligations with the Crown, because pastoral lease, as it has stood historically, has given us a real feeling of belonging to the land, and as Kate outlined before, it's a huge motivator to look after land and make really long-term decisions about what's best for the land. And I would say moving forward, at the moment, we're steering down a very strict regime of a high-cost regulatory system. And to be honest, we would rather spend our hard-earned money on caring for this land than getting caught up with consultants and just more and more regulation and processes when we've already got district regulation to deal with, regional and national, and to add another layer on top of the RMA review that's happening at the moment. I have grave concerns about what the future will look like for us as a pastoral lease.
So when it comes to, for both of you, freshwater regulations, Indigenous biodiversity regulations nationally, how can the High Country actually integrate farm management plans with what is already happening at regional council level and achieve the same outcomes that pastoral lease the LINZ is actually wanting to achieve collectively of what's already going on? It seems like a double up.
Can I have a go at that one first, Emily?
Yes, go for it, Kate.
I think Sarah, with the integrated farm management plans, if I take a step back and look at the new regulations the proposed regulations as they stand, one of the really big problems that sticks out there is that it treats all properties as if they are the same and really turns it into a box-ticking type exercise. And high country properties are not the same. They vary hugely between the regions. When you look at topography, altitude, rainfall, the underlying soil quality, aspect, like you name it, there's going to be variation. They are very, very different properties. So trying to adopt a one-size-fits-all just can't serve the purpose, and that's where integrated farm management plans can actually work really, really well, because they enable you to look at each property individually, identify its strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, its really delicate areas that are in most need of protection, and that'll be quite different for different properties. And so we actually would have put our time into that, and a lot of farmers already have those in place. They're going to also be a requirement for fresh water, and for a lot of our quality assurance programs, we're required to have them. They will be really useful for Indigenous biodiversity. I think they're a fantastic tool that we could actually use, as the basis for a lot of collaborative work with all of the various entities, rather than us having to redo applications, redo explanations every time we want to speak to a different authority, or every time a piece of legislation is reinvented. This is something that could actually sit over the top of a lot of that and answer a lot of questions and give outside stakeholders quite an intimate perspective of property in quite a short time.
Emily, and what are you hearing there from Kate that's in similar situations at Glenmore?
Well, I think I completely agree with Kate, and I also think that if, in the establishment and creation of this reform bill, no one drove up our drive and came and talked to us about what is best for Glenmore, how best they could support us, because I think part of this, Sarah, is that there needs to be a greater acknowledgement of the years and, over a century that the Murray family have been, a good example is Glenmore here, just the intricate, intimate knowledge that we have of our land, and acknowledging that high country farmers care deeply for the environment, care deeply for the land, and we're very passionate about its future. And so, as Kate acknowledges, the one size fits all is just cannot be a way forward. And we've had a farm management plan here on Glenmore for the last 15 years, and we've been working closely with Professor David Norton from Canterbury University to establish that plan, and it's reviewed regularly. And we also have photo monitoring points over the whole property. We have exposure plots over the whole property. And we always get an independent people in to take the photos and to do the studies on where we're heading with that. And that's just to absolutely make sure that our farm management practices are not only really working well with the native cover on the property. And we're seeing some fantastic results from that. So the farm management plan really is, as we see it, the only way forward.
Kate, we spoke to Ian McKenzie just earlier from Environment Canterbury, particularly about the huge work that High Country Properties do in pest eradication, both plant and animal, that were introduced species, of course. Could you give us an idea around the land at Mount Nicholas and how much has been involved in that 40 plus years that your family have been there?
Yeah, sure, Sarah. Look, I wouldn't even actually like to, I think it would scare me if I added it up completely when you look at particularly if you take the time into account as well. But you're right in saying a lot of the pests that we've got here have been, with the best intentions, introduced for various reasons over the years and, have proliferated in a New Zealand setting and have done things that they don't do in their home countries and cause the high country a lot of problems. Our main issues here, gorse, broom, willow trees. Willow trees were planted, to secure riverbanks, but unfortunately they really enjoy proliferating into the high country, and if they get into indigenous high altitude wetlands, they can dry them up in a matter of years and destroy the wetland. And so there's issues like that that you need to deal with in a short space of time and manage very actively. Wilding pines are a small issue for us. There was some wilding pines planted by the catchment board for erosion control, and they've proliferated. We've had really great support from the local Wilding Pine Control Trust in helping us get those under control, but the seedlings keep coming up. Rabbits, there's been, just prior to us coming to the station, over 1 million rabbits were poisoned. That was an estimate, but done off, counting various areas. And everyone had to leave the station for 2 weeks because the smell was so bad after the poisoning. So, there's over generations and generations, there has been so much work done. And I think the key to that is actually being here to see it and to do it, and also, having an economic interest in getting it done so you can, continue to have the station perform, but also that we've actually, it's a part of our responsibility and that we can actually earn the income in order to put it back into looking after these properties. And huge portions of income of high country stations goes straight back into looking after the station. And I think that's something that, perhaps is a misconception that all high country farmers drive around in Range Rovers and holiday in Wanaka, when it's really just not the case. Huge portions of the income of these properties just go straight back into them. They're expensive to look after, they're remote, and so all the services that we try and get in, or any contractors, even just having things delivered here like weed spray, it all costs a lot of money.
Sorry, the reason I laugh is because, all my friends had holiday homes and I always dreamed of one as a kid, was just not even on the table. So I totally agree with you. There is a lot of misconceptions there. Emily, can you follow on from the huge work the Murray family have done in pest management?
Yeah, absolutely, Sarah. Wilding pines will probably be number one for us here at Glenmore, purely because historically there was shelter planted around each of the mustering huts up the valley, and now we've just been quietly spreading over the years. But we've been really lucky too. We've had a lot of support from local Wilding Pine Trust and also from Environment Canterbury. So we've certainly got that under control, but we have had to take the seed source out. Huge time and energy and resources has gone into taking the seed source out for those. And the other big one for us has been rabbits. Like Kate, historically, the rabbit numbers have spiked just well and truly beyond control. And at the moment, we're dealing with another huge spike in rabbits. And it's actually been a consequence, ironically. We've been working really closely with the Te Manahuna project. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's a group that wants to make this western side of the Mackenzie Basin predator-free. So we've been working really closely with them, and we've got hundreds of traps around the station. It's been wonderful to take all the ferrets and stoats and rats and cats out of the ecosystem. But the trouble is that's very much reduced the pressure on the rabbits as well. So now we're working with them closely again for the coming winter to really try and get on with those rabbits and get them poisoned.
I'd like to end with a bit of a summary, but also a clear message. Eugenie Sage is chairing the Environment Select Committee, of which many think is a conflict of interest since the Crown Pastoral Land Reform Bill has been her legacy project, if you'd like to call it that. Would each of you feel comfortable in what you would love to say to Eugenie? Kate?
Well, look, I think, and I'm looking forward to being able to see Eugenie when we give our presentation on our submission. But what I would really like to see and say is, look, I think that the outcomes that the bill wants to achieve in having enduring stewardship, having strong support for ecological, environmental values, alongside farming values, is what we all want. We're all really passionate about the high country and how we look after it. And I think where we perhaps differ is how that's best done. We would disagree that the regulatory framework is going to achieve those outcomes, to any extent. All I can see it adding is red tape, time and cost, for all parties, not just the farmers. And so I think if we can work collaboratively with farm plans as the tool that we're using, we will be able to achieve those outcomes and more. We should have high aspirations for what we can do in the high country for it to continue to be, an iconic farming area that ends up on advertising all over the world, but also a really, really great base for, strong ecological benefits and Indigenous species to survive and thrive.
Emily?
Again, fully agree with Kate's comments. And further to that collaboration, I think I would really like to see more acknowledgement for the pastoral lessees and for their passion and for how they have cared for 1.2 million hectares of the South Island high country is cared by a very small number of people. So it wouldn't be very difficult, I don't think, for the Crown to work a lot closely with us on an individual level. So I think that acknowledgement would be really key and also this land is in good heart. We've always worked hard, and it is a huge task that we take on because, again, it's that passion and respect for the land that drives us. So if Eugenie could perhaps put more emphasis on that going forward, that would be fantastic.
Following in Jacinda's words of being a bit more kind to understanding the situation around that for our high country leaseholders. Thank you so much to Kate Cox from Mount Nicholas Station, of course, trustee on the High Country Accord, with a submission before the Environment Select Committee on the Crown Pastoral Land Reform Bill, and Emily Murray joining us from Glenmore Station. And over 20 years they have been battling with tenure review to try and get an outcome for their family and generations to come. Thank you so much, ladies. I really enjoyed hearing both of your personal experience, and I know many of our viewers and listeners would have as well, so thank you.
Oh, nice boots.
Yeah, thanks. They're new.
Ben, you alright?
Oh, yeah, sorry, mate. Just meerkatting pretty hard, eh? You? I just said to myself, Ben, you work hard.
You deserve new boots.